the spotlight is on the agri-food sector to improve their gender balance with public scrutiny of their gender pay gap reporting. I'm Nancy Fallon and I want to be part of helping to improve the gender balance within the agri sector and using this series as a platform to allow women in the sector to share their insights and their experience. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Mary Coughlan. So Mary, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. So let me turn first to, I guess, your record as a trailblazer in your career, the first female deputy leader of Fianna Fáil and also the first and to date only female Minister for Agriculture. Were you aware that you were making such records and being such a trailblazer as you were going through your career?
I wouldn't say I was a trailblazer, but when you go back and reflect, first of all, I was one of the youngest ever to be elected to the Dáil at 21. Left University College Dublin and went straight into political life. Not what I had chosen, but it was chosen for me. Yes, being the first woman as a full Minister for Agriculture was a great honour and a challenge, because I suppose I would have had a huge interest in agriculture. I was chair of the Agricultural Committee within the party. And of course, agriculture is hugely important, and fisheries to Donegal. But all of that being said, there were those challenges where I had been perceived as someone who supported the smaller farmer, wouldn't have been as au fait with the challenges of larger farming and the agri-food sector. So I had to prove myself and working in a fairly strong male environment. But I was there to listen, I was there to learn, and I had a lot of support as well within the department, which really did benefit. And the most important thing for me was I went out and I met everyone. I didn't leave a parish over 4 years that I hadn't been in, and that was a great opportunity.
No, it's interesting and to hear you talk about those challenges. I mean, here, you know, we speak now about trying to improve gender balance, but as you say, when you were a minister, it was probably even worse than it was now, essentially.
Certainly, yeah.
And did you find that impacted your ability to do your job, and what did you use to try and overcome any of those challenges?
Well, I suppose we have to be very careful and say that it's unfair to say that men wouldn't support women in political life or in any career. So I think we should take that as being read. Understanding, yes, in some technical terms, you just had to learn. And I suppose one of the challenges we had within the department was there were very few women at the higher level within the department. And I'm delighted to see that has changed, and there are far more women at leadership level within the departments, within the civil service and the public service. And that has really, really helped. But certainly I also had a junior minister with me, Mary Wallace, who was a trailblazer in her own way, the first woman minister for forestry. But we had a very good working relationship as ministers. And I suppose I learned a lot of that from another woman, Sheila de Valera, who was my first senior minister. And she taught me things that, with all of her experience, that were hugely important. She briefed me after every cabinet meeting about what happened within the cabinet, even though I was only a Minister for State. She allowed me to run my section of the department myself in consultation with her. So I did exactly the same with my Ministers for State. We were a team, we worked well together, and that congeniality was also hugely important, and people brought different perspectives into the department. And look, we had the challenges of the newspapers. Naturally, it's not seen, unfortunately, as an industry that's hugely important. And it's tutted, I might have to say, on a number of occasions, until people actually get in and see how important the agri-food sector is in this country, how many jobs it supports. It is our indigenous industry. And the huge impact that it has on every person's life. The minute you open the fridge, a farmer has had something to do with that, or the agri-food industry. And I think it's important as well to say that the cooperative movement developed into a multi-million euro industry where we have now exported so much. Is it almost 80% of our exports or of what we produce is exported, and we have massive reputations all over the world. Hugely important to us. And I think people don't actually understand how important that sector is.
I think that's really interesting what you say about the agri-food sector, because I think I agree with you. I mean, it's such an important business to the island of Ireland, and I always see it as it reaches out its tentacles far and wide across the entire Ireland and of the country. And I suppose equally, as you say, we have such a strong heritage in relation to Ireland as an exporter and producing very high quality food, and to be fair, in a very sustainable way because of the way in which a lot of our food is produced in terms of being grass-based system. And I think it's an interesting comment to make, especially in the context of all the challenges that we face on sustainability in terms of remembering that. But I suppose it's not for today maybe, but to just pick up on two other points. I mean, that point around, we need to be fair to men, and I think it's a really good point. I mean, I certainly, when I look at my career, I definitely feel that my strongest mentors actually have been men. And it's fair to say that men do support women as they come through. So I think it's a really good point to make. But equally alongside it is as well this, I suppose, this point that if you don't see it, you can't be it. So
that's true.
You mentioned, Sheila and what she did for you in terms of being that kind of role model to not tell you what to do, but be there as support. And I think that's a really important thing that as all of us as females, but equally as males, need to be there to support anyone who's coming through. But I suppose in this particular place, to be supportive of women coming through and trying to rise up in the ranks and be a part of the industry. So I think that's really important.
It's hugely important because, first of all, you have to have role models, and that's very, very important. And there are expectations then as a role model, and as well as that, there'll be certainly plenty of people who want to make sure you don't make it either. So, you have to be strong and you have to be resilient, and that's one of the concerns I would have for some of the younger people in this country, that they may not be as resilient as they should be. And they may have unrealistic expectations the first day. You have to have a little bit of experience to get where you want to be. And certainly supporting others as well is hugely, hugely important. And that's why when I was appointed, a lot of women were delighted that I was a woman, there was an expectation I would speak for them in many ways, and a realisation that women's role within agriculture is hugely, hugely important. Heretofore, it would have been a more supportive role. A lot of agricultural advisors used to say to me, I'm delighted to see a woman coming into the office because at least everything would be right, whereas it might come in a shoebox or something if it was a man. But, it was too much so a supportive role. What we're trying to change is now that we would actually have women who are farmers, who own their own land, who own their own businesses. And there has been a huge emphasis on supporting women in rural Ireland and rural Europe. It's the first time there's been a recognition now within the Common Agricultural Policy that gender equity must be addressed. And that is why the Minister asked me to chair the first national dialogue on gender, to make sure that we're out there to the forefront, I might add, in supporting more women in the farming sector and the agri-food sector. It's not going to be without its challenges. Inheritance will be one of them naturally, but there are opportunities through partnerships, through tax, through legals, all of that. There are opportunities there. And it's also very important that we support education, and that education is there for women when they have the opportunity and the time to participate in education. And now that we have more blended learning, now that we have more opportunities through technology, it must happen that those technological advances will also support women in the agri-food and in the agriculture sector. And leading on to that will actually have to be a huge emphasis on research and development. And all of those coming together and a culmination of all those supports, I would hope that the first national dialogue on St. Bridget's Day would actually see, in a number of years, more women in agriculture and more women farmers. Well fit to do it. It's not a physical thing, because there's plenty of machinery, plenty of technology. It's just having access to land, sharing of land. And one of the challenges I had when I was minister was we couldn't encourage younger people into agriculture because there was a draw to other types of activities in economic activities. And a lot of people who would have built up farms had great challenges in inheritance and who would take over the farm. So we've changed that. We've encouraged and we have provided policies that supported more younger people into agriculture, and equally the minister presently is very anxious to do the same to get more women into agriculture, and I think it'll work. And we'll need them. We'll need them because you spoke about sustainability, and that is going to be a challenge for agriculture. And a lot of farmers would say that there's an overemphasis on agriculture. And to an extent, they're not wrong. But I think that the younger people now are going to have to look at it in a different way. And I think women will bring a different perspective into how sustainability can work. Water quality, hugely important. New methodologies of farming. All of that is going to be very, very important. And at the same time, we mustn't forget what we do well. We do produce very good beef. We can go into organics, hugely important. We have great livestock. We have good tillage. All of these are backed up, yes, by a regulatory framework, which farmers will always give out about, but it's there. When a minister goes abroad, when Board BA go abroad and want to sell Ireland, they have the regulatory framework behind them to assure the customer and the market that we do have a good quality product. And I think one of the things that we don't talk about very much is that we are one of the biggest producers of baby food in the world. That didn't happen by chance. That happened because we had excellent primary producers, tremendous regulatory frameworks to support an industry that's so important, and investment from abroad. All of that culminated in a good news story, and that's also hugely important as well.
And yeah, just picking up on that point about, I suppose, the challenges that face the agri industry going forward. I mean, I think challenges bring opportunity, and to kind of bring it back to that point about attracting people to want to stay within the industry, you know, whether it be male or female. You know, I do think there are so much opportunities there in terms of, as you say, the change that will happen, the innovations that will need to be developed in order to make farming more sustainable within Ireland and to address the sustainability issues. So I think in some ways it can be seen as a positive, it can be seen as an exciting time, because actually we're in a kind of a time of step change to a certain extent. Yeah. But let me bring you back actually to your comments about the national dialogue, and I suppose that the Minister asked you to hold and to chair. Can you share any views in relation to that were discussed at that, and points that came up that kind of stand out to you as very big item points that will need to be addressed?
Well, leadership and visibility was one of the topics, and we invited a number of key people who were in the agri-food sector, who were CEOs, who were women, and who shared how they managed to get to the top, and the supports that they needed, and the fact that they did it. And I think that's hugely important. That visibility is very, very important. And a number of women who were farmers in their own right, how they managed it. And, you know, it's not that there's a dictatorial thing here. It's just an evolving thing where you have a change of mind, where, particularly when it comes to new people taking over in the farming sector, that the women should be considered equally to the men. And that there can be partnerships as well, and that's all very, very important. We also looked at where are the challenges, where are the tax challenges, where are the legal challenges, and how you can marry the same thing for any industry. Your time at home, perhaps having a family, and at the same time trying to run a business, which is farming. And of course, naturally, if you have to be there every day, how do you manage all of that and get some family time and some quality time? And what supports are needed to allow that to happen? And the third thing was very much education. The other thing that was very important for women was having these support evenings and days specifically for women. I know there can be people saying, why do that? But, you know, the dairy women all came together. They looked at what was different, what was their challenges, and how they could be supported. And that interaction between the department, the minister, and those support groups is going to be very important as well, leading on from the work that has been done within the dialogue. We had a minister from Germany, no longer the Minister for Agriculture, but still within political life. And she was the leader who brought the new Common Agricultural Policy through within her presidency. And surprise, surprise, these are the same challenges that they have in Germany. They're the same challenges in every part of the European Union. That is why they are targeting certain supports to allow more women to stay and remain in agriculture and to come into agriculture. And the agri-food sector is very, very important. And I come from a very rural part of the world. And if we didn't have the agri-food sector, you wouldn't have the co-ops, you wouldn't have the shops, you wouldn't have, like, the one thing about farmers is when they get their money, they do spend it. And they spend it locally. And because they're, you know, uplifting their own enterprises and all of that, and that's all very, very important.
No, absolutely. I think it again goes back to that point about just the reach of the agri-business throughout Ireland, and its absolute importance as the spine to many of the economies in you know, villages and town across the country. And you know, you mentioned there the changes to CAP to try and make it more friendly in terms of females staying within farming. What other changes do you think we will see maybe coming out of the dialogue in terms of policy changes to help support females to stay and to continue and to come into the farming industry?
Well, attitudinal change and behavioural change, two very difficult things to achieve, but those are what's going to be needed. And that behavioural change will be in new practices and how you're smarter in doing the job that you need to do. And perhaps instead of spending all day doing something, you're going to have to change the way you do it, how you use technology to allow that to happen. Like, it's unbelievable what is happening, and we don't talk about it enough. Like, you get an app on your phone and you can see how the grass is growing all over your farm.
Yeah.
Years ago, you had to go out and spend the whole day checking all of this. Now you can do it in 30 seconds. You can also see what nutrient management is needed. You know, all of these things are just unbelievable, and it happened over a very short period of time. And you know, how you can look after better breeding, how you can get a better return if you invest in a particular way. All of this is so supportive. And you know, at the same time, as a business, it needs to be, you have to, if you run a business and it's not working, then there's a problem. So you have to be able to be smart enough to see where your opportunities are within the markets and where you're going to be afforded an opportunity to have a livelihood from it. At the same time, and this is one of my things that a lot of people don't like to hear, there are farmers and farms that are not sustainable and they don't make an awful lot of money. But the mental health aspect of it is hugely important. So if you're a single elderly person living relatively rural, and you have to get up in the morning because you have a little bit of farming, you do a few cows or a few sheep, you're not going to make an awful lot of money. But the mental health and the mental welfare of those people is also so important. And that is why there are other types of supports for those type of people. Big farmer down in Cork or Kerry is going to say that's not farming. But for somebody like me, that is also a sustainable way in which you manage your land. And that is equally important. So you have larger farmers, middle-sized farmers, and very small farmers. It's how you get the policy framework to allow that to happen. Different supports, different ways of doing things. And now what you're having, which is also very important, is outcomes. What is the outcome of the policy? And then if that outcome is sustainable, if that outcome is visible, if it's working, then that's how you support the farmer. So there's no point in applying for acres, for example, and just leaving the land sitting there looking at you for 5 years. The minister wants to see what you have achieved in order to keep that land sustainable, in order to sustain the countryside. And that is why it's very important now, and it's difficult for some people to grapple, but the outcomes are going to be as important as the support network that's going to be there as well from the EU.
Yeah. No, and it's interesting because I think that's exactly it. You do need to be able to measure because we will be obviously called to account for measure 2030, 2050. We know what that will bring in terms of having to reduce our carbon emissions. So making farming more sustainable, I think it's exactly the same. You need to be able to measure the progress along. And equally, I think flipping over from that, but going over to kind of that kind of supports around female participation is exactly the same thing. You know, you talked about those groups that allow people to kind of meet together and you can say, well,
sure,
I don't know, but actually it's really important because again, it goes back to your point. I think that, you know, you have to see others succeeding and going through the same challenges, but yet still keeping on going.
That's right, and you learn from others, and that collaborative approach is very important. And there's other opportunities out there, energy, for example, and you know the nitrates directive and things like that are going to be challenging. So what new ideas are out there to support farmers in order to have an income? And certainly cooperative movement was an old-fashioned thing. I think it's going to come back again, where you're going to have a number of farmers cooperating, perhaps with some outside investment in the creation of energy. Very badly needed, I might add. And it will also provide a new opportunity for farmers from an income point of view, and it'll also address the issue of effluents. So, you know, that's going to be out there, and that's going to be hugely important. So as we're saying, that just transition, perhaps reducing what you're doing and making it more sustainable, and at the same time having other opportunities. And I would hope that the policy framework will be there to support that industry as much as the Common Agricultural Policy had done in the food production side.
That's interesting. And I suppose you've mentioned that policy framework. Do you think we'll get that soon, or when do you think we'll see that change? You think it's coming?
It's happening. It's slow. That can be very frustrating. And you're also looking at cross-departmental initiatives, which can be challenging as well. And I do a little bit of work in that sector. And you have a number of departments working together. It's now been led by the Chief Inspector in the Department of Agriculture. And everybody's coming from a different perspective. But at the end of the day, it's the same pot of money that's coming from the government and from the state, and the same needs for the people. So, I would hope, I was speaking to the Minister recently, and he said, hopefully after the summer that we will see some real initiatives out there, because time is passing us by and we have to get this done as quickly as possible. And like, there's other things out there going on with animal nutrition, for example. All of that is cutting edge, and that investment is within the education sector, within our universities and within our research and development side. So it's, there are those opportunities, and I certainly feel that women can make a change. They will challenge, and rightly so, and younger people will challenge, but certainly without a doubt, in my view, women will bring a lot more into the animal husbandry side and into the time management of how you actually run a business and run a farm. And the attitudinal change, I think, within life has changed a lot, about partnerships within relationships and things like that, and how you support women to go into any aspect of life. That change is there. It took a while, but it's there. And my expectation is that we would see as many women as men over the next number of years in the farming sector.
And I definitely really hope that is the case. But I agree with you. I think we are definitely at a point of inflection. I think there is definitely change happening, and I do hope and think that it is definitely for the better for the industry. And it does seem to have momentum. And it's interesting, I'm not sure what exactly has caused that momentum now as opposed to 10 years ago. As you say, maybe it's the changes to the Common Agricultural Policy, maybe it's some of the actions that were set in the Food 2030 vision, all of those things, maybe it's all a combination of those things, but it is interesting to see. I think there is definitely momentum there, and I think.
And I suppose one of the other things that women would say, and I think it's in a lot of businesses, is access to money. The fact that they don't necessarily have an asset in order to get a loan, and what risks there are in getting access to funding. And now that land has become so expensive, it is going to be a very expensive enterprise. So partnerships, I think, will be one of the ways in which you can manage a farm. And I think, life has changed so much. And as I said, the attitude towards inheritance has changed. And certainly that fear that, oh my goodness, the wife's going to take everything and we'll be left with nothing and all of this. I think that's changed in rural Ireland. But, at the same time, it's the same for every industry. It's the same for every business. And small will grow. Yep. So take it at a small level. The agri-food sector, how many small enterprises were supported by Leader? Yep. And now they're very large companies. And a lot of them were led by women because they saw a gap in the market. They saw something that needed to be done, and they went away and did it. So I think that quality is something that will be seen in the farming sector as well.
Yeah, I know it's really good, relevant point, actually. Yeah, and so then kind of going on to looking, I suppose I look to myself. I see you doing so much in relation to trying to increase and improve gender balance in the sector. What do you think people like me in professional services companies, what can we do to try and help and improve that gender balance?
Well, equally, opportunities like this are going to be very important. The fact that it's spoken about within the media will be equally important. And that there's a recognition outside of other sectors that this sector is hugely important within the economy. Things go from one to the other. It's tech. It's finance, it's this, that, and the other thing. Not as many people speak about the agri-food sector or the agricultural sector, the farming sector, the primary producing sector, and the importance of it. So speaking about it is going to be very important. And companies like here, I'm sure, have particular sections that look specifically and support people within that sector. And also access to finance is going to be very important. And the fact that perhaps there may be an initiative where you would have some risk takers who would be prepared to invest in this type of a sector. People are sometimes risk averse, and then some people are the other side, but if we've got a balance there, that perhaps there may be a pot of money available for women specifically that they could have access to in order to invest in their enterprises. And I certainly feel that if that was to happen, it would be hugely, hugely beneficial.
Yeah, I think finance is so important, and especially in the current environment where we're seeing the cost of it increasing so quickly. I think having access to finance and putting yourself in a place where you have the story to tell in order, and I say story, but you can show that actually this is a viable asset. Yes, there will be risk in it, but you know what, there's a good story behind it, a good business story behind it, and it might bring a return in the years to come. I think that's allowing the support for people to get that down.
And they do have those types of pots of money available, some at a smaller level, a couple of thousand, up to quite a substantial amount of money, and it's been specifically for women. So, I think something like that is maybe something we should look at, and we look forward now to seeing what the report will say, and the Minister is very anxious to ensure that within his own department he will have the tools available to support, and perhaps there will be other opportunities within the enterprise, trade and employment, for example, where those tools would also be provided to support women in the sector.
And finally, if I bring you back to the first question I asked you around just being such a trailblazer and a record of being a trailblazer, if you could go back to Mary, who's 5 years old and sitting in her primary school class, learning Irish probably, or I don't know, maybe learning her tables, what would you say to her to allow her, and kind of aimed at kind of the younger generation coming through, to really be able to, I suppose, blaze that trail and, as we say here, address that issue around gender balance and be that female role model?
I would say that my mother was one of the best role models I had. My mother was a psychiatric social worker, a hotelier and a farmer. She also gave it all up to rear her children because her view was that education was the way forward, and that access to education and participation in life was so important, and she drove people to be independent. And in our house there was an equality, whether we liked it or not. So I had to farm, the boys had to do the housework, and vice versa. So there was no hiding place in our home.
Well, thank you so much, Mary. Really delighted to chat to you and really interested in hearing your views. It's been a fascinating discussion, so thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.